The morning shift at Station Kepler 4042 began like any other. Hundreds of aliens from different worlds walked through the bright corridors. Some had scales, others had fur, and many had body shapes that humans would find strange. But they all worked together for the Galactic Coalition, a group of peaceful species that helped each other across the stars. In Combat Arena 7, Instructor Vekthar waited for his students to arrive. He was tall, with blue scales that changed colors with his mood. He had 4 arms, which made him excellent at fighting. Vekthar had been teaching combat for 200 years. He had trained soldiers from 40 different alien species. He knew almost everything about fighting, or so he thought. Today was different, though. Today a human would join his class. Vekthar had read the file about humans. They came from a planet called Earth. The Coalition scientists said Earth was a Class 12 death world. That meant the planet was extremely dangerous. The gravity was heavy. The air was harsh, and deadly animals lived everywhere. Most Coalition species would die on Earth within days. But Vekthar was not worried. He had taught other Deathworlders before. They were usually strong but not very smart about fighting. They used muscle instead of technique. He expected this human to be the same. The door opened and a human walked in. His name was Jake Morrison. He was about 1.8 meters tall, which was average for humans. He had short dark hair and calm brown eyes. He wore the standard Coalition training uniform, which looked thin and light. Jake walked with confidence, his eyes looking at everything in the arena. He noticed the padded floor, the weapons on the walls, and the viewing platforms above. Jake stopped in front of Vekthar and gave a small bow. He said his name was Jake Morrison and that he was ready to learn. Vekthar studied the human carefully. Jake looked fit but not overly muscular. He had only 2 arms and 2 legs. No natural weapons like claws or sharp teeth. No armor on his skin. He seemed fragile compared to most fighters Vekthar knew. The instructor told Jake about the class. He explained that the students here were the best fighters from many different worlds. They practiced 17 different fighting styles from across the galaxy. Vekthar wanted to see if the human could keep up. Jake simply nodded and said he was looking forward to training. Soon, other students arrived. There was Krij, a tall insect-like alien with sharp arms. There was Selvara, who had 6 tentacle arms that could attack from many directions at once. There was Horvek, a huge alien with muscles like rocks, and there were others, each one a skilled fighter from their world. When the aliens saw Jake, they stopped and stared. To them, he looked weak. 2 arms seemed like a big disadvantage. His soft skin had no protection. Some students wondered if the human would survive even 1 training session. Vekthar told the class to welcome their new member. The aliens made polite sounds, but their eyes showed doubt. The class started with warm-up exercises. Everyone stretched and moved to prepare their bodies. Vekthar watched Jake carefully during this time. The human was surprisingly flexible. His balance was perfect. Every movement was smooth and controlled. There was no wasted energy. Jake moved like water, flowing from one position to another. This made Vekthar curious. Maybe this human was different from other Deathworlders. After warming up, Vekthar told the class to practice partner drills. He paired Jake with Krij, the insect-like alien. The drill was simple. One person would attack slowly and the other would block or redirect the attack. It was basic training that every student knew. Krij looked at Jake and made a clicking sound. He said that humans should be careful because his sharp arms could hurt someone by accident. Jake smiled and thanked him for the warning. He said he would try his best. They began the drill. Krij threw a slow punch toward Jake's chest. Jake's hand moved fast and pushed the attack to the side. The movement was so smooth and efficient that it looked easy. Krij tried again, this time a little faster. Jake blocked it again without any trouble. His feet moved perfectly, keeping him balanced and ready. The alien increased his speed more. He started mixing high and low attacks, trying to confuse Jake. But the human's hands moved like they knew where every attack would go. Jake blocked everything without even looking stressed. Then Krij said he would go full speed. His species was known for attacking very fast. Most students needed months to defend against a mantoid at full speed. Jake looked at Krij and said quietly that he was ready. The insect alien attacked with incredible speed. His arms became a blur, but Jake's hands were already there, redirecting each strike. He moved just enough to avoid or deflect each attack. Nothing hit him. He made it look simple. Then something amazing happened. Instead of just blocking, Jake suddenly stepped forward. He moved inside Kriej's guard where the long arms could not reach him well. Jake's hand gently touched the alien's chest. If this had been a real fight, Kriej would have been knocked out. The entire arena went silent. Everyone stopped training and stared. Kriej stepped back, his eyes wide with shock. He asked how the human did that. Jake lowered his hands and spoke calmly. He said that Kriej was telegraphing his attacks. Before each strike, his lower left shoulder moved slightly. It was a tiny movement, but it told Jake where the next attack would come from. Vecthar felt surprise rush through his body. The human had not only defended against a full-speed mantoid attack, but he had also spotted a flaw in Kriej's technique. This was a flaw that Vecthar had been trying to help Kriej fix for weeks, and Jake had seen it in just minutes. The instructor's scales changed to a color that showed respect and interest. He walked onto the mat and looked at Jake with new eyes. He asked if Jake would agree to a demonstration. He wanted to see how human fighting compared to coalition fighting styles. Jake looked at Vecthar calmly. He asked if the instructor thought it would help the students learn. Vecthar said yes. Jake agreed. The two fighters faced each other on the mat. The students formed a circle around them. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Would the human last even a few seconds against their legendary instructor, or would this Deathworlder surprise them all? Vecthar did not know it yet, but he was about to learn something important. Earth had not just sent another strong fighter to the coalition. They had sent a warrior who had spent his whole life studying the art of combat, and that made all the difference. The students watched as Vecthar and Jake prepared to spar. The alien instructor stood tall with his forearms ready. His blue scales rippled as he moved into a fighting stance. Jake stood across from him, looking much smaller. His two arms hung relaxed at his sides. His feet were shoulder-width apart. He looked calm, almost peaceful. Vecthar explained the rules to everyone watching. They would fight using light contact only. The goal was to show technique, not to hurt each other. The first person to score 3 clean hits would win. Both fighters bowed to show respect. The instructor had fought thousands of opponents in his long life. He knew how to read bodies and predict attacks. He thought humans would be easy to understand. They were predators who chased their prey over long distances on Earth. They should have good stamina but average speed and strength. Vecthar threw the first strike. It was a testing jab with his upper right arm. He wanted to see how fast Jake could react. Jake's head moved just slightly. The punch passed so close that it almost touched his face, but it missed. Jake had moved the smallest distance possible. No panic, no big movements. Just perfect timing. The instructor tried a combination next. He used all 4 arms to attack from different angles at the same time. This was where his species had a huge advantage. 4 attacks happening together should overwhelm any opponent. But Jake was already moving. He tilted his body and suddenly 3 of the punches hit nothing but air. The 4th punch came toward his chest, and Jake's hand redirected it gently to the side. He used Vecthar's own power against him. The alien instructor felt a wave of respect. He moved faster now. His arms became a blur as he launched a complex series of strikes. This combination had defeated many skilled fighters. Each arm worked together with the others in a practiced pattern. Jake flowed around the attacks like smoke. He did not waste any energy. Every step had a purpose. Every movement was exactly what was needed and nothing more. Vecthar realized something shocking. The human was reading all 4 arms at the same time. He was seeing the pattern and predicting where each strike would go. Then Jake did something unexpected. Instead of stepping back to create distance, he suddenly stepped forward. He moved inside Vecthar's reach, where the long arms became a problem instead of an advantage. Jake's hand touched lightly against the instructor's stomach. Vecthar stopped and stepped back. He announced the first point and his scales showed colors of surprise. The students made sounds of shock in their different languages. Some of them had been training with Vecthar for years. They had never seen anyone score on him so easily. The fighters reset their positions. This time Vecthar did not hold back as much. He used advanced techniques that he had learned over 2 centuries. He mixed different fighting styles together. He used feints to create false openings. His speed increased until most species would see only a blur, but Jake's face stayed calm. His breathing was slow and controlled, and somehow he was still reading every attack. More than that, Vecthar realized the human was learning his patterns. Each exchange lasted a little longer because Jake was adapting in real time. The instructor changed his style completely. He switched to a circular fighting method from the Quellan species. It used spinning movements and flowing attacks. Jake changed his approach immediately. He started using straight, direct movements that cut through the circular attacks. It was like a knife cutting through water. They moved back and forth across the mat. Vekthar used his advantages of reach and extra arms. Jake used better footwork and positioning. He always moved to angles where fewer arms could hit him effectively. Then Vekthar saw what looked like an opening. Jake had positioned himself in a way that left one side exposed. The instructor attacked with all four arms in a coordinated strike that should have been impossible to defend. But it was a trap. Jake had created that opening on purpose. As Vekthar committed all his power to the attack, the human suddenly dropped lower. He rotated his body under two of the punches. Then he used Vekthar's own momentum against him. Jake swept the instructor's front leg while controlling one of his arms at the same time. Vekthar, who had perfect balance for over 200 years, felt himself falling. Jake controlled the fall so the instructor would not get hurt. Before Vekthar even understood what happened, he was on his back. Jake was standing with his hand positioned over the instructor's chest. The human said quietly that this was the second point. Then he offered his hand to help Vekthar stand up. The entire arena was completely silent. The students could not believe what they had just seen. Their legendary instructor had been taken down by a being with only 2 arms and no natural weapons. Vekthar accepted Jake's hand and stood up. His scales turned a color that showed deep respect. He asked what that technique was called. Jake explained that it was called judo. It was a fighting style from Earth that used the opponent's force against them. When you redirect someone's energy instead of fighting against it, size and strength matter less. The instructor asked if this was common knowledge among human fighters. Jake shrugged and said it was one of many fighting styles that humans had developed. There were styles for punching, for grappling, for weapons, and for mixing different approaches. Humans had been developing these arts for a very long time. Vekthar asked how long humans had been practicing organized fighting. Jake said that written records went back several thousand years. But the traditions were probably much older than that. Fighting had always been part of human history because Earth was so dangerous. The instructor felt a chill. Thousands of years. Most coalition species had stopped serious combat training centuries ago. They thought it was old-fashioned and unnecessary. But humans had never stopped. They had spent thousands of years making fighting into a science. Vekthar said they were tied at one point each. He asked if Jake wanted to continue. Jake nodded and returned to his ready position. This time both fighters showed complete respect for each other's skills. Vekthar used everything he knew. He mixed styles smoothly and tried to keep Jake guessing. Jake responded with equal skill. What followed was not really a fight. It was more like a conversation using movement instead of words. Each fighter showed a technique and the other found the answer. Each one learned from the other. The final point came almost like they both agreed on it. Vekthar used his most powerful combination, the finishing move he had perfected over his long life. Jake recognized it and countered it perfectly. He gently touched 2 fingers against Vekthar's throat. In a real fight, it would have been deadly. Both fighters stepped back and bowed to each other with complete respect. Vekthar formally announced that Jake had won. Then he spoke loudly so all the students could hear. He said he had been teaching combat as if it was ancient history. But Jake had reminded him that fighting was a living art that never stopped growing. He thanked the human for the lesson. Jake smiled genuinely for the first time. He said thank you for the chance to train. He told Vekthar that he had learned a lot. The instructor turned to his shocked students. He asked Jake if he would be willing to share his knowledge with the class. He said everyone could learn much from human fighting traditions. Jake said he would be honored to teach. The students gathered around Jake with many questions. They wanted to know about Earth fighting styles. They wanted to learn the techniques he had used. Jake answered every question patiently. Vekthar stepped back and watched. His mind was working through what this meant. Humans were not just another species joining the coalition. They were Deathworlders who had turned survival into an art form. They had knowledge that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten or never learned. The instructor decided to write a detailed report to Coalition Command. If one human could show this level of skill, what could a whole army of humans do? That answer would change how the entire galaxy saw Earth and its people, and it would all start here, in this training arena. with one skilled human who had come to the stars not to conquer but to share what his people knew. 2 days passed after the sparring match between Jake and Vecthar. In that short time, everything changed on Station Kepler 442. Someone had recorded the fight and shared it through unofficial channels. Now everyone on the station had seen it. Security officers watched it. Diplomats watched it. Even civilians who had never cared about fighting were talking about the human who had defeated the legendary instructor. Lieutenant Commander Zexville sat in his office watching the recording for the 6th time. He was a Quellan, with 6 tentacle-like arms and sharp intelligence. As chief of security for the entire station, he needed to understand what this meant. He slowed the video down to watch Jake's movements in detail. Every time he watched, he saw something new. The precision, the timing, the way Jake had turned Vecthar's strength into a weakness. Someone knocked on his door. Zexville told them to enter. His deputy, Brektor, walked in. He was a huge Gorlian with rocky skin and massive muscles. Brektor was hard to surprise, but his face showed concern now. The deputy reported a problem. After people saw the fight, 40 security officers had requested to join Vecthar's training class. The class size had grown by 300% in just 2 days. Senior officers from other departments also wanted permission to watch the training. Zexville's tentacles moved in a way that showed surprise. 40 officers was nearly 1/4 of the station's entire security force. Brektor said it was not just their station. 3 other coalition facilities had sent messages asking if Jake could visit and teach there too. The commander thought about this carefully. For years, combat training had been declining across the coalition. Most species thought it was old-fashioned. They believed civilized beings did not need to know how to fight. But one human had changed that attitude in just 2 days. Zexville asked what Jake's current job was. Brektor explained that Jake was working in diplomatic security. He protected the human ambassador and her staff. His performance was excellent. Commander Talrin, who supervised that division, had submitted a report yesterday. Jake had found 3 security problems in their standard procedures. 2 of them were serious enough that Talrin had changed the procedures for the entire division. The commander felt both respect and worry. One person should not be able to change established systems so quickly. But Jake was doing exactly that through simple competence. Zexville decided to schedule a meeting with Jake and instructor Vecthar. He needed to understand what they were dealing with. Meanwhile, in Training Arena 7, Jake was learning that teaching aliens was both challenging and rewarding. The current class had 15 students, 3 times the normal size. They came from 9 different species. Each species had unique bodies and fighting traditions. A 4-armed alien needed different techniques than a 6-tentacled one. What worked for someone with 2 legs would not work for someone who floated in the air. Jake had to adjust his teaching for each student. He explained to the class that the basic ideas were the same for everyone. Fighting was about controlling distance, timing, and momentum. The specific techniques would be different for each species, but the core concepts were universal. He asked Selvara, the Quellan student with 6 tentacles, to show her species' standard attack. Selvara's tentacles whipped out in a complex pattern. Each limb moved independently but worked together. It was impressive and chaotic, but clearly well-practiced. Jake watched carefully and then explained what he saw. Her tentacles moved in a spiral pattern from her center. It was effective for overwhelming opponents, but it was also predictable. An experienced fighter could read the pattern and find the gaps. He stepped closer and asked Selvara to try the same attack at half speed. She hesitated. Even at half speed, her strikes could hurt most species badly. Jake assured her he would be fine and told her to begin. The tentacles moved through their pattern. Jake watched for a moment, then stepped forward. He moved smoothly through the gaps in her attack. Within seconds, he was inside her guard with his hand gently touching her center mass. He explained that the pattern was beautiful and effective, but patterns could be read. If she occasionally changed the timing or direction of one tentacle, she would break the predictability. For the next hour, Jake worked with each student individually. He found their strengths and helped them improve their weaknesses. He never talked down to anyone. He treated each species' natural abilities with respect and curiosity. He asked questions about their bodies and adjusted his teaching to match. During a water break, a young alien named Pixin approached Jake nervously. Pixin was a Korath with scales and a long tail for balance. Pixon asked if everyone on Earth was trained to fight like Jake. The files said Earth was dangerous, but it was hard to imagine an entire world of warriors. Jake drank some water and thought about his answer carefully. He explained that not everyone trained formally, but most humans understood basic self-defense. Human history had been shaped by conflict, not always fights between different species, but among themselves. Wars over territory and resources had happened for thousands of years. All that fighting had refined their understanding of combat. Another student asked if humans enjoyed fighting. Jake considered the question. He said some humans did enjoy it, but most would prefer peace. Being good at something did not mean you enjoyed it. Humans became skilled at fighting because they had to. Their world and their history demanded it. That skill helped keep them alive. Pixon asked if that was why Jake taught. To keep others alive, Jake said yes. Every technique he showed them was meant to give them an advantage if they ever needed it. He hoped they would never need it, but if that moment came, he wanted them to be ready. The class continued, and Vekthar noticed something important. The students had started the session curious about the human who had beaten their instructor. Now they were genuinely interested in learning. They saw value in what Jake taught. That evening, Vekthar invited Jake to his office for tea. It was a custom from the instructor's homeworld. Vekthar said that Jake had a natural talent for teaching. The students responded well to his methods. Jake accepted the tea gratefully. He said Vekthar had created a good learning environment. That made any teacher's job easier. The instructor disagreed. He said he had been teaching these techniques as historical curiosities, as relics from primitive times. Jake taught them as practical living skills. That made a profound difference. Jake sipped the tea, which tasted like flowers. He shared a saying from Earth. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Combat skills had fallen out of fashion in the Coalition because they had achieved peace. But peace was maintained by the capacity for war, even if that capacity was never used. You could not truly choose peace unless you understood the alternative. Vekthar's scales showed colors of deep thought. He asked Jake what would happen when the Coalition truly understood what humans were capable of. Jake met his eyes steadily. He said the Coalition would have to make a choice. They could fear humans or they could learn from them. Maybe both. But humans had not come to the Coalition looking for fights. They came looking for friends, for knowledge, for a place among the stars. The instructor asked what would happen if conflict came anyway. If someone tested humanity's capabilities. Jake smiled slightly, though his eyes stayed serious. He said they would discover why humans survived Earth, and why Earth could not break them. Vekthar raised his cup in respect. He said he believed humans would change the Coalition. Whether that change was good or bad remained to be seen. But it would certainly be interesting. They drank in comfortable silence. Two warriors from different worlds finding common ground. Neither of them knew that their conversation was being monitored by Lieutenant Commander Zexavil's security systems. The Quellan officer was already writing a report that would reach Coalition Command within hours. The galaxy's introduction to humanity had begun quietly, but Zexavil suspected it would not stay quiet for long. 6 days after Jake's demonstration, a message arrived from Coalition Command. Lieutenant Commander Zexavil read it 3 times. His tentacles coiled and uncoiled with mixed feelings. Admiral Korthvan would arrive at Station Kepler 442 in 48 hours. He was a high-ranking military officer from the Talvarian species. The official reason for his visit was to assess new Coalition member capabilities. But Zexavil understood the real reason. Command wanted to see the human fight for themselves. The commander immediately contacted Jake and Instructor Vekthar. He asked them to come to his office. When they arrived, Jake looked calm and professional. Vekthar's scales showed colors of worry. The instructor had dealt with command inspections before, and they rarely meant anything good. Zexavil explained the situation without wasting time. The training session had attracted attention from the highest levels of Coalition military. Admiral Korthvan was coming to observe Jake's abilities directly. Jake's expression did not change. He asked what the commander wanted him to prepare. Zexavil said that was the problem. The admiral was bringing Commander Skoral with him. Skoral was considered one of the finest warriors in the entire Coalition military. The Talvarian species produced exceptional fighters, and Skoral was exceptional even among them. Vekthar's scales turned darker. He said this sounded less like an assessment and more like a challenge. Zexville agreed. Admiral Korthvan's record showed he preferred direct evaluations. He came from the old guard, those who believed military skill mattered more than diplomatic papers. Jake asked about the parameters of the evaluation. The commander said those would be decided when the admiral arrived. However, based on past assessments, Zexville expected full contact sparring with minimal restrictions. Vekthar's voice rose slightly. Full contact meant serious danger. Commander Skorral weighed nearly twice what Jake did. His species evolved on a high-gravity world with hostile megafauna. Such a match could result in serious injury. Jake held up his hand. He said he appreciated the concern, but he had trained against larger opponents before. If Command wanted to see what humans could do, he was willing to show them. Zexville studied the human carefully. There was no false bravado in Jake's voice, no overconfidence, just a calm assessment of the situation and acceptance of what needed to be done. It was exactly the kind of professionalism the commander had come to expect from Jake. Zexville agreed and said he would make the arrangements. He asked Vekathar to work with Jake over the next 2 days to prepare him as best as possible. The following 48 hours were intense. Vekthar pulled files on every recorded fight involving Commander Skorral. He studied the Talvarians' fighting style, strengths, and patterns. Jake absorbed the information, asked specific questions, and spent hours in the training arena working through scenarios. Other students volunteered to help. Each one offered their species' perspective on fighting someone like Skorral. Selvara worked with Jake on defending against multiple attack angles. Horvek, whose dense muscles made him similar to a Talvarian, helped Jake practice grappling techniques. Word of the upcoming match spread through the station. By the time Admiral Korthvan's ship docked, half the station's personnel had requested permission to watch. The Admiral was an imposing figure. His Talvarian body included thick, armored skin, powerful muscles, and predatory grace despite his size. His small, sharp eyes assessed everything with calculating precision. Commander Skorral stood beside him. If the Admiral was imposing, the commander was terrifying. He stood over 2.5 meters tall. His muscles looked carved from stone. Scars covered his hide, each one proof of battles survived. The evaluation was scheduled for Combat Arena 7. The arena had been modified to hold the expected crowd. Observation platforms filled with security personnel, diplomats, and military officers from across the station. Jake entered wearing simple training clothes. He looked almost fragile compared to his opponent. The size difference was dramatic. Skorral could probably lift Jake with one hand. Admiral Korthvan stood at the center of the arena. His voice was amplified so everyone could hear. He explained that this evaluation would determine human combat capabilities and their potential integration into coalition security forces. The match would be full contact, continuing until one participant yielded or could not continue. Medical personnel were standing by. He looked at both fighters and asked if they understood. Skorral nodded. His expression was neutral, but his eyes gleamed with anticipation. Jake met the commander's gaze steadily and said he understood. The Admiral told them to take their positions. They moved to opposite ends of the mat. Jake performed a brief bow, a gesture of respect from his martial traditions. Skorral responded with a fist-to-chest salute from his own culture. The Admiral's hand dropped. He said to begin. Skorral did not waste time with testing strikes. He charged forward with shocking speed for his size. He closed the distance in seconds. His strike came like a hammer, aimed at Jake's center mass with enough force to crack ribs. Jake was not there when it landed. He had moved sideways just enough to let the massive fist pass by. His counterstrike snapped out, hitting Skorral's extended arm at a nerve point. The Talvarian barely seemed to notice. His hide was too thick and his nervous system too well protected. He spun, bringing his other arm around in a devastating backhand. Jake ducked under it. He felt the wind from the strike pass over his head. He was already analyzing and processing information. Strength, reach, and armor were all in Skorral's favor. Speed was roughly equal. But there had to be weaknesses. The next 2 minutes showed adaptive combat at its finest. Skorral pressed his advantages without mercy. He used his size and strength to dominate space, forcing Jake to constantly move and defend. But Jake was doing more than defending. He was learning. Every strike Scoral threw told Jake something about the Talvarian's balance, his recovery time, his preferred attack angles. Every block and dodge gave Jake data to process and use. Then Jake saw it. Scoral's tremendous upper body strength came at a cost. His legs, while powerful, were less flexible than his arms. His stance, while solid, committed him to forward momentum once he began a charge. The next time Scoral committed to a full power strike, Jake did something that made the entire arena gasp. Instead of dodging away, he moved forward and down. He dropped into a crouch that brought him under the Talvarian's guard. His legs swept out in a precise arc, striking behind Scoral's knee at the exact moment the commander's weight was shifting. Physics did the rest. Scoral's own momentum, combined with the sudden loss of support, sent him crashing forward. Jake rolled clear, came to his feet, and was in position before Scoral could fully recover. The Talvarian pushed himself up. For the first time, his expression showed surprise. In his entire career, very few beings had successfully taken him off his feet. Scoral growled that it was impressive. He said they should go again. What followed was unlike anything most observers had ever seen. It was not a brawl or a simple test of strength. It was a chess match played at combat speed. Each fighter adapted to the other, learning and counter-learning in real time. Scoral modified his approach. He became more cautious with his charges and protected his legs better. Jake adjusted in response. He switched to a strategy focused on endurance and evasion, making the larger fighter work for every exchange. Minutes stretched on. Scoral's strikes remained powerful, but Jake noticed the slight decrease in speed. The Talvarian's cardiovascular system was built for short, explosive fights. Humans, evolved as persistence hunters, could maintain high activity far longer. Jake shifted tactics again. He moved from pure defense to controlled aggression. He began targeting specific points like joints and nerve clusters. Any vulnerability in the Talvarian's armor. None of the strikes alone were devastating, but together they were having an effect. Then Scoral made a mistake. Tired and frustrated, he overcommitted to a charge. He put all his strength behind a tackle meant to overwhelm Jake through sheer mass. Jake had been waiting for it. He did not try to stop the charge or dodge it. Instead, he stepped into it, dropped his weight, and used a modified hip throw. Scoral's own momentum carried him up and over Jake's center of gravity. The arena shook when the Talvarian commander hit the mat. Before he could recover, Jake had moved into a submission hold. He controlled one of Scoral's arms and positioned himself where the larger fighter's strength could not help him. Jake said quietly to yield. He applied just enough pressure to show he could dislocate the joint if needed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Scoral tapped the mat 3 times, the universal signal of submission. Jake immediately released the hold and stood. He offered his hand to help Scoral up. The Talvarian accepted it, rising to his feet with an expression that mixed disbelief, respect, and something that might have been joy. The arena erupted in noise. Different species cheered and made sounds of amazement in their own languages. Vekthar's scales cycled through colors so rapidly they appeared to shimmer. Admiral Korthvan stepped forward. His expression was unreadable. He asked Commander Scoral for his assessment. The Talvarian looked at Jake, then at the Admiral. He said that in 20 years of combat experience, he had never faced an opponent who so thoroughly outthought him. Admiral Korthvan turned his attention to Jake. He asked how the human knew to target endurance rather than matching strength. Jake stood respectfully but spoke with confidence. He explained that humans evolved on a world where they often faced larger and stronger predators. They survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and more persistent. Those same principles applied in combat. He could not match Commander Scoral's physical advantages, so he did not try. He focused on what he could control, which was positioning, timing, and endurance. The Admiral was silent for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, his expression softened into what might have been a smile. He said he had come to the station skeptical of the reports about humans. He thought perhaps the stories were exaggerated. That one lucky match against an instructor did not represent true capability. He gestured to the arena around them. He said he had been wrong. What Jake demonstrated was not luck. It was the product of a warrior culture that had refined combat into science. The Admiral turned to address all the observers. He said this should be a lesson to all Coalition personnel. Humans brought skills that the Coalition had forgotten or never fully developed. They would be wise to learn from them. Looking back at Jake, the Admiral continued. He said he would recommend to Coalition Command that human combat instructors be assigned to major military installations across Coalition space. Humanity had much to teach them. Jake bowed respectfully. He said humans were honored to serve and to learn from their Coalition partners. As the crowd began to leave, Commander Squirrel approached Jake with a massive hand extended. He said Jake had fought with honor. He would be pleased to train with the human again. Jake gripped the hand firmly. He noted the carefully controlled strength in the Talvarian's grasp. He said the honor was his. Squirrel had pushed him harder than any opponent he had faced in a long time. Vecthar joined them. His scales showed colors of pride and satisfaction. He said they had witnessed a turning point. The Coalition's understanding of combat and of humanity had fundamentally changed that day. The instructor was right, though none of them could yet know the full extent of that change. 3 weeks after the evaluation, Station Kepler 442 began transforming. Combat training, which had been a minor elective for security personnel, became one of the most requested courses on the station. Classes ran from early morning to late evening, filled with students eager to learn from the human. Jake was no longer alone either. 4 additional human instructors had arrived. Katie Collins taught grappling and ground fighting. Ryan Hughes specialized in striking techniques. Lisa Grant focused on tactical defense. Alex Carter introduced weapons combat. Together, they covered a wide range of human martial arts. One afternoon, Jake stood in the main observation deck looking out at the stars. He felt a familiar presence beside him. Instructor Vecthar had become a close friend over the past weeks. They often met to share thoughts and compare their different martial philosophies. Vecthar asked if Jake was thinking about his impact on the galaxy. Jake admitted he was wondering where it all would lead. When he signed up to be one of the first humans in Coalition security, he thought he would be learning from everyone else. It turned out humans had just as much to teach. Vecthar said it was more than Jake realized. He had received word that morning. The Coalition Council had approved the establishment of the Interspecies Combat Academy. It would be based on this station, with human instructors serving alongside teachers from other warrior species. Jake had been selected as one of the co-directors. Jake turned to look at his friend with surprise. He said he was just a combat instructor. There were diplomats and commanders more qualified for that kind of position. Vecthar disagreed. He said Jake was more than just an instructor. He was a bridge between species, someone who understood both the warrior's mindset and the importance of cooperation. The council recognized this. Before Jake could respond, his communicator chimed. It was Katie Collins, one of the other human instructors. Her voice carried urgency. She said Jake needed to come to Arena 3 immediately. There was a situation. Jake moved quickly with Vecthar following close behind. They arrived at the arena to find Katie standing between 2 groups of students. On one side stood Talvarian security officers led by Commander Squirrel. On the other side were several Korath and Mantoid students. The tension in the air was obvious. Jake asked calmly what was happening. Squirrel stepped forward. His expression showed trouble. He explained there had been a misunderstanding during training. Some of his people had taken the competitive nature of the exercise too far. Words had been exchanged. One of the Korath students, Pixon, spoke up. The Talvarians had called their traditional fighting styles primitive. They said those styles were useless compared to what humans taught. Jake could see where this was heading. The sudden popularity of human combat techniques had created an unintended problem. Some students were dismissing their own species' martial traditions as inferior. Jake told everyone to sit down. His voice carried authority without aggression. He said it firmly and added now the students complied. The Talvarians looked surprised at being given orders by someone they could physically overpower. But respect for Jake's skills had earned him the right to command. They followed his instruction. Jake walked to the center of the arena and gestured for Katie to join him. He told her to show her specialty at full speed. Katie moved into position and began demonstrating grappling techniques. She flowed from one submission hold to another with practiced precision. It was impressive, showing human innovation in ground fighting. Jake then asked Commander Squirrel to demonstrate his species' traditional combat. Squirrel stepped forward and performed a sequence from Talvarian martial arts. It was powerful, emphasizing strikes that could shatter bone and defenses that used their natural armor. The movements were different from human techniques but no less sophisticated. Jake called on Selvara next. The Quellan student demonstrated the flowing, multi-limbed style of her people. Her tentacles moved in patterns that created zones of attack impossible for most species to copy. Jake let the silence settle before speaking. He said every species in that room evolved under different conditions. They faced different challenges and developed different solutions. Talvarian combat arts were made for their bodies and their history. The same was true for Quellan techniques, for Karath methods, for mantoid styles, and yes, for human martial arts. He gestured around the arena. They were not there to replace traditions with human methods. They were there to learn from each other, to create something better than any of them could achieve alone. Human techniques worked well for humans because they evolved from specific needs and capabilities. But the most effective fighter was not the one who abandoned their heritage. It was the one who understood the principles behind all techniques and adapted them to their own strengths. Pixon raised a hand hesitantly. The young Korath asked if human methods were not superior. After all, Jake had defeated Commander Skorall, one of the Coalition's finest warriors. Did that not prove human techniques were better? Skorall spoke before Jake could answer. He said no firmly. It proved Jake was an exceptional warrior who understood how to use Skorall's weaknesses while avoiding his strengths. If Skorall had trained with humans before that match, if he had understood their principles and integrated them with his own training, the outcome might have been different. Jake nodded in approval. He said that was exactly right. The goal was not to make everyone fight like a human. It was to expand everyone's understanding of combat principles. Then they could be the best version of their own species' warrior tradition. He walked to a training dummy. He told Katie to hit the target using pure grappling principles. Katie struck the dummy with a solid blow. Her technique was perfect for human body structure. Jake then asked Selvara to hit the same target. But she should use the principle of leverage that Katie just demonstrated while using her own species' natural advantages. The Quellan student thought for a moment. Then she struck with 2 tentacles while using a third as a support point for additional leverage. The impact was significantly harder than her usual strikes. Jake pointed out what happened. Selvara had not abandoned her technique. She had enhanced it with a principle from another tradition. That was what they were trying to teach. Understanding showed on many students' faces. The tension that had filled the arena began to fade away. One of the Talvarian students asked if Jake could show them how to combine human endurance principles with their fighting style. Jake had used that strategy effectively against Commander Skorall. Jake agreed immediately. He said they would make it a group exercise. Everyone should pair up with someone from a different species. They would teach each other one technique from their traditional style. Then they would work together to find principles from other traditions that could make it better. The arena came alive with activity. Students began working together. The earlier argument was forgotten in the excitement of discovery. Vekthar approached Jake with Skorall beside him. The Talvarian commander's expression was thoughtful. Skorall said Jake had handled that situation masterfully. Not through dominance or threats, but through education and understanding. Jake replied that was what good instructors did. Over the following weeks, the way training worked on the station changed completely. Students from different species worked together as standard practice now. They shared techniques and principles, creating hybrid approaches that were more effective than any single tradition. The results were remarkable. Katie developed a course on ground fighting that used Quellan flexibility principles. Ryan adapted his striking techniques to work with mantoid attack patterns. Lisa created tactical scenarios that used the strengths of mixed species teams. The human instructors themselves were learning as much as they were teaching. One evening, Jake received a communication from Earth. It was Admiral Susan Parker, the human officer in charge of Coalition integration efforts. Her face appeared on the screen and she looked pleased. The Admiral said she wanted to give Jake advance notice. The success of the combat training program on Kepler 442 had exceeded all expectations. The Coalition was requesting expansion of the program. They wanted human instructors at 20 additional stations. They were also proposing a formal alliance specifically focused on military training and security cooperation. Jake felt the weight of that statement. He said it was a significant commitment. He asked if humanity was ready for that level of integration. Admiral Parker said the better question was whether the Coalition was ready for it. Jake's work had changed how dozens of species perceived humanity. Humans were not just new members anymore. They were partners, valued for their unique contributions. Jake pointed out it was not just human contributions. They were learning just as much from the Coalition. The Talvarian strength conditioning methods were incredible. Quellan spatial awareness techniques had applications they were still discovering. This exchange went both ways. The Admiral smiled. She said that was exactly the attitude that made Jake the right person for this assignment. She told him to keep doing what he was doing. He was building something important. After the communication ended, Jake made his way to Combat Arena 7. The first official graduation ceremony for the Interspecies Combat Training Program was taking place that evening. 50 students from 15 different species had completed the intensive 3-month course. The arena was packed with observers. Friends, colleagues, and commanding officers had come to watch. The atmosphere was celebratory but also respectful. Everyone understood the significance of this moment. Each graduate came forward to receive their certification. Some chose to display techniques from their homeworld traditions. Others demonstrated hybrid approaches they had developed during training. All of them showed a level of skill and understanding that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Jake watched with pride as Pixon, the young Korath who had questioned him weeks ago, performed a beautiful combination. The technique mixed Korath agility with human timing principles and Talvarian power strikes. It was something entirely new, born from the collaboration of 3 different warrior traditions. When the ceremony concluded, Commander Skorall approached Jake with several other Talvarian officers. The massive warrior looked almost formal. Skorall said his government had made a request. They wanted Jake to visit their homeworld and consult on integrating these training methods into their military academies. Jake said he would be honored. The commander continued. There was more. The Quellan Assembly had made a similar request. So had the Korath Council and the Mantoid Collective. Jake had started something that extended far beyond this station. Jake looked around the arena at the diverse group celebrating together. Students who had started as strangers from different worlds were now friends. They were united by shared challenges and mutual respect. He said they had all started it together. Humans brought their traditions, but everyone had contributed. That was what made it work. It was not about human techniques conquering the galaxy. It was about all of them becoming better by learning from each other. Vekthar joined them. His scales showed colors of deep satisfaction. He asked Jake if he remembered their first meeting. When Jake had walked into his class and Vekthar thought he would be teaching the human, Jake said he remembered. Vekthar had been kind enough not to be too obvious about it. The instructor admitted he had been arrogant. He thought he had nothing to learn from a species he had never heard of. Jake had taught him humility that day, and hope. Jake asked what he meant by hope. Vekthar explained. Hope that the Coalition could evolve, could rediscover strengths they had forgotten. Humanity had given them that gift. Not through conquest or dominance, but through partnership and mutual growth. Jake placed a hand on the instructor's shoulder. It was a gesture of friendship that had become natural between them. He said that was what humanity wanted when they reached for the stars. Not to dominate or prove themselves superior, just to be part of something larger. To contribute what they could and learn what they needed. The conversation was interrupted by Katie calling Jake over. The other human instructors had gathered with a group of alien students. They were discussing plans for the new Interspecies Combat Academy. Everyone had ideas about courses to offer and teaching methods to try. Jake excused himself and joined the group. He listened as a Mantoid student suggested a course on multi-limbed coordination that could benefit species with extra appendages. A Korath proposed teaching environmental adaptation, using techniques that worked in different gravity levels or atmospheric conditions. Lisa asked about incorporating medical training. Understanding how different species' bodies worked would help fighters know where to strike or how to avoid causing permanent damage in training. The ideas flowed freely. Everyone contributed. No one species dominated the conversation. It was true collaboration, and it gave Jake hope for the future. Later that night, after the celebrations had ended, Jake stood alone in the empty arena. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. When he had signed up to join Coalition security, he had imagined himself as a simple guard, someone who would protect diplomats and maybe help with station security. Instead, He had become a teacher, a bridge between cultures, and apparently a co-director of an academy. Life had a funny way of surprising you. His communicator chimed. It was Skoral. The Talvarian asked if Jake wanted to join him for a late meal. Several other instructors and students were gathering at the station's communal dining area. It had become a tradition after training sessions. Jake agreed and made his way to the dining area. When he arrived, he found a remarkable scene. Talvarians sat next to Koraths. Quellans shared food with mantoids. Humans laughed with aliens whose names Jake was still learning to pronounce. The barriers between species had not disappeared, but they had definitely lowered. He joined a table where Vekthar, Skoral, Katie, and Selvara were deep in discussion about fighting philosophies. The conversation ranged from practical techniques to abstract concepts about the nature of combat itself. Selvara asked an interesting question. She wanted to know why humans had so many different fighting styles. Most species had one or two traditional methods. Humans seemed to have dozens. Jake thought about how to explain it. He said that Earth was a big planet with many different cultures. Each culture faced unique challenges and developed unique solutions. Some lived in mountains and developed fighting styles for uneven terrain. Others lived near water and created techniques that worked on boats. Climate, geography, available weapons, and cultural values all influenced how fighting styles evolved. But more than that, humans never stopped questioning and improving. When two cultures met, their fighting styles would mix. The best techniques from both would combine into something new. Then that new style would meet another, and the process would repeat. Thousands of years of that evolution created the diversity of martial arts humanity had today. Ryan added that it was not just about fighting either. Many martial arts were also about philosophy, discipline, and personal growth. They taught respect, patience, and self-control along with combat techniques. Skoral made a sound of understanding. He said Talvarian warrior traditions were similar. Combat training was as much about building character as building strength. Vekthar said this was what made the collaboration so valuable. Every species brought not just techniques, but entire philosophies about what it meant to be a warrior. By sharing those philosophies, they all became richer. The conversation continued late into the night. Plans were made for the academy. Ideas were shared about new training methods. Friendships deepened over food and discussion. As Jake finally made his way back to his quarters, he felt satisfied in a way he had not experienced before. He had come to the stars looking for purpose. He had found it in an unexpected place, not as a conqueror or even as a protector, but as a teacher and student both. Far above the station, the stars continued their eternal dance. Among them was Earth, the death world that had forged humanity into survivors, but also into teachers, friends, and partners willing to share what they knew. The galaxy had expected humans to be dangerous fighters. That expectation had been met and exceeded. What surprised everyone was that Earth's children brought not just skill in violence, but wisdom in teaching. Not just strength, but the humility to learn from others. Not just the capacity to fight, but the desire to build something better than war. Jake Morrison,